So welcome to the panel called Diversity in Visualization. We have a once-in-a-lifetime set of panelists here today, consisting of Rita Borgo, a senior lecturer at King's College, Vetria Byrd, an assistant professor at Purdue, Aviva Frank, an undergraduate student, Kelly Gaither, associate professor in Texas, myself, Metoyer, an associate professor at Notre Dame, and Eric Young, a senior scientist at the SFTC. So before we jump in, just as a mental note, we're going to follow the order on this slide. So the panelists will speak in alphabetical order by surname. For about 10 minutes each. So let's jump back 1 year in time to the death panel. Some of you might have seen the death panel last year on the death of scientific visualization. We had a really, really great panel last year about factors that were hinged around submissions and acceptance rates for the scientific visualization track of the conference. And we had 4 highly distinguished panelists. And then we had a lively discussion period, and the discussion period pretty much started right off with a student from UC Davis, Annie Preston, I believe it was, saying, I noticed that nobody on the panel mentioned the topic of diversity in conjunction with the death of scientific visualization, and she had the opinion that the VIS community is a little bit behind on the diversity topic compared to other conferences and venues, and that sparked quite a lively discussion. So it was immediately obvious that this was a very interesting topic to the VIS audience, and it was obvious that it should be a panel discussion for the next year or at some point. So this, in my mind, this is really the death panel part 2. And this is the birth panel. And you can watch that panel. It's been archived on YouTube, by the way, so you can just search for the death of scientific visualization on YouTube, and you'll find that. So let's jump in then. So we're here to talk about diversity, and diversity has different meanings, right? It can refer to age, gender, cultural, ethical, or subject matter, or technology. So we're going to look into what we mean by diversity. We're going to answer questions like, is diversity healthy? Does diversity bring benefits? Is there a lack of diversity in VIS, and what could be the cause of that? And should we as a VIS community be concerned about this topic? Are there any changes necessary? And what might we learn? And this outstanding set of panelists is going to answer all those questions. And yeah, it's going to be really exciting. I can't wait. Good. So everybody has roughly 10 minutes. Yeah. So it's a full set of people, experts.
Okay. Thank you, Bob, for the nice introduction. So now I was quite flattered by the invitation that Bob extended to me to participate to this panel, because for me, diversity is quite an interesting subject for several reasons, which concerns my career and my life. But one thing that for me is extremely important is that the definition of diversity is not just reduced to gender, because actually diversity is spans a much wider and much bigger horizon and panorama. So of course, gender is one of the most obvious declination of diversity. There is also diversity in terms of individual background, so which can also cover different aspects from cultural, ethical, ethnical as well. But there is also diversity in terms of the distinctiveness of each individual. So what is a contribution that each individual brings to the community? Because everybody has a unique a set of characteristics that can make a community more interesting. And then there is also another aspect in terms, especially if we look at diversity and visualization in terms of content. So what we can offer to the outside world, what we can offer as a community. And then perhaps there are other aspects which this simple summary doesn't really cover fully. Now I wanted to go through each one of these aspects, which for me summarize all the principal components of diversity and visualization in a specific context. So I did my homework and I tried and looked at diversity in terms of gender within our community. And I'm actually quite a positive person, so from a gender point of view, I was expecting the VIS community to do quite well, and indeed the results were actually quite positive. So we know roughly that about female percent in computer science degrees around 25%, while the female presence in the VIS community is around 27%. So overall, we are not doing too bad. We are actually above the national average. And this is quite a good news. There are certain sections of VIS that push up the average, but I don't want to go into detail on those ones. But then I went on and I tried to gather as much information as possible. And I looked at other conferences. I wanted to look at supercomputing as well, but the data were just too much and I couldn't get the information from the community. So I just grabbed what I could from the web. And the picture that came up was that the other closest conference to VIS I thought it would be CHI. And I could gather the composition of the organizing committee in CHI and I compared it to the organizing committee in VIS. And what happens is that actually CHI has a split of 50%, a really equal split, 50-50% in terms of gender distribution in the organizing committee. And I don't think this is done by chance, but it's actually done on purpose. I double-checked the number twice just to make sure I wasn't adding or subtracting people at random. So VIS is still doing pretty good. If you only look at the organizing committee, we are up at 28%, but CHI is still going better than we are. So the second aspect was individual background. In terms of VIS, the only data we can really look at is the provenance of the participants in terms of country. Now we covered pretty much all the European, US, Indian, Japan, China, Australia. We have a really nice coverage in terms of memberships. The underrepresented group in this case, and actually it comes out quite expected, is participation from more African countries. Now, this is also an effect. This is also a problem that we experience in higher education. Now, the situation in the US is probably different from the situation in the UK. I am familiar with the situation in the UK. And we do not have that many African students in our degree, in computer science degree. However, and this is the interesting aspect, I'm involved quite a lot with the student societies, and the panorama changes a lot if we move towards other degrees, like, for example, finances, business, and medicine. The interesting change in panorama happens also at postgraduate level in terms of masters. Recently, I've been put in charge of a data science program, and I had a lot of students from African countries that were coming from a finance or they were taking a parallel medical degrees, joining the data science project because they were interested in the analytical aspect of data science. So I'm in charge of the program, but I also teach simulation data visualization, and they were taking that module as an elective because of the possibility to get access to visualization technique to analyze their data. It's actually quite an interesting aspect, which I will come back later on. The other aspect is the distinctiveness that each individual, the richness that each individual brings to the community. And again, I think that in VIS, in visualization, we are doing pretty well in that. So I wanted to do a bit of an experiment, but then I decided not to do it because I thought it was not relevant. However, I asked some of my colleagues to send me pictures of their offices. And this is what came out. So this is the first picture, and this is personally my dream office. It's perfectly organized, everything is in place. It's just a pleasure to get into a room like that in the morning from my point of view. Then we come to the second one, and this just looks like somebody's brain explosion. So this person, she or he, definitely needs a whiteboard. They have written on the windows, there are flip charts everywhere. I'm surprised they have not written on the wall yet. And then we go back to a bit more of normality, even though there are a few items in here that are kind of hard to explain. So why, to a stranger that comes into this office, they might ask, what are these people doing in their free time? They're just playing around with constructions and things. It's kind of hard to sometimes to explain the props that we need to use in our work. And then the final one, and I challenge you to guess who this person is. They really take very seriously the idea of working out. And this is the first thing you see when you enter in their office. I've been in this office, and it's interesting. At least it gives an idea to his or her postgraduate students that working with him or her is actually a hard work. So the experiment I wanted to do is I wanted to ask if you could identify the gender of each office, so who was the owner of each office. But I thought it's actually really irrelevant for the point I want to make, because the interesting aspect is that I mean, I'm pretty sure that if each one of you gives me a picture of his or her own office, we might even find quirkier things than we have seen in these 4 pictures. And this is just to show that each one of us really brings something more to the community. So each one of us is diverse in his own kind. And this is what makes this community so much interesting. The last point that I wanted to talk about is actually diversity as content. So in the past years, the program committees, the organizing committee has actually done an incredible work, because they have extended the range of possible topics to support submission of more diverse papers. How successful this was, I cannot say. But it is true that perhaps looking around, one of the aspects where we might need to improve is diversity of content. Diversity of content in terms of expanding more towards, opening more towards neighboring community, to increase the diversity of what we propose, what we look at, how we talk within this really nice community. So overall, looking at diversity in VIS, actually the picture that comes out is not that bad. It's actually healthier than other communities. There are some aspects where we could probably work on, because a lot of factors might actually influence each other, in particularly increasing diversity of content, which is something that came up in a discussion also a couple of days ago in this venue, might actually open up to new communities and then intake more diverse individuals. And so increase diversity in terms of background, but also features of characteristics, bringing new oxygens. It is not something easy to address, because VIS as an identity, we don't want to become Kai. We want to maintain our own identity, but at the same time, perhaps try and look at something diverse. So overall, we are not doing bad. And my point really is, he's not doing bad at all. Diversity is a very complex concept and should be treated as such. Because if we underestimate or simplify the concept too much, then we end up treating people like Pokemons. And Pokemons, and this is an analogy that a colleague of mine made, and he also wrote an article on Forbes, that in a way that you sometimes feel like, okay, you little Italian woman, I need you, I'll throw you in the mist. So you feel like being used just for the characteristics that you are needed, and this often happens in academia. And this makes the individual doubt about their own achievements, especially if those achievements are related to one's personal work or career. That's it. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. I am going to share with you my path to visualization, and in doing so, share with you some of the things that I've done in terms of broadening participation in visualization. So as I was preparing these slides, I was trying to figure out what's the best way to share my path or to enlighten you in terms of what brought me to this point. So I'll give you a little background about me, and that will set the stage for the different things that I've done so far. So I have a background in computer science and biomedical engineering, which has helped me tremendously in data visualization. But prior to graduating from UAB, University of Alabama at Birmingham, and joining Clemson University in Clemson, South Carolina, I had no idea about the VIS conference. So Clemson was awarded an EAGER grant. And so the idea was that I would introduce data visualization to the campus with other researchers and help them in visualizing their data for 2 years. So at the end of the first year, my supervisor and CIO at the time, very direct for those of you who know Jim Bottom, says to me, "So Vetria, you like it here? You want to stay here?" And I said, "Yes, as long as there's funding for me, I will stay here." And so what was meant to be a two-year appointment actually extended on until 2015. So while I was there, someone in the computer science department recommended that I go to a IEEE VIS conference. And so my first conference was in 2011. But in the process of being at Clemson, I was the director of advanced visualization. I developed a number of workshops which began at the beginning stage, intermediate, and advanced. And so that way, it gave me a perspective to see who was interested in data visualization and how can I enrich them in the sense of letting them know the importance of data visualization and how it can be used in their research. So that led to a number of invited talks, different workshops at different conferences, and also to that first year at VIS. And so that first year at VIS, I didn't know anyone. And I met Tamara, and she actually was like the highlight of that conference for that year. So I did not tell her this, but this was my experience. So I had read her papers, and I was excited to see her, but she, as you know, is a very busy person. And so each time I'd go to approach her, somebody else would get in front of me. And so she'd have a conversation with them. So I kind of felt like I was stalking her, but I wasn't really. And so I keep trying to get in to talk to her, and I give up. And I said, that's it. I'm just not going to have an opportunity to talk to her. As I'm walking away, she's standing there, and I go over and I introduce myself. And she literally sat down with me, had a long conversation, answered whatever questions that I had about visualization at that time. And so that, to me, was the highlight of that experience. And so my subsequent experiences, I met some other people at the VIS conferences. So in 2012, I met Mariah at one of the lunches that you do when you're new to VIS, and that was a great experience. In 2013, I met Bernice, which was a great experience as well. And so these women were actually role models to me, and it said to me that, okay, this is a field that I can consider something that I can do and do well in. However, what I noticed, there did not seem to be a lot of people that looked like me at these conferences. I was not aware of any mechanisms for engaging people that look like me to participate in the conference, and for engaging people who are underrepresented at the VIS conference. So in 2014, I did not go to the conference just because I didn't have the funding to go. So that had nothing to do with me not seeing anyone that didn't look like me. However, what that did was it gave me an opportunity to start a couple of initiatives and to think about or to realize that visualization is a catalyst for communication, it's a conduit for collaboration, and it's a platform for diversity and participation. So one of the initiatives that I started, I wrote a NSF REU grant and was awarded while I was at Clemson. So it was a research experience for undergraduates in collaborative visualization applications. And so this experience, being the PI of this, this grant, gave me the opportunity to focus on bringing in students who I felt were underrepresented. And so what I want to do is take a minute to talk about what underrepresentation means for me in terms of the students that I would engage or to reach out to. Yes, it means gender, but it also means, for me, students who don't have the resources that a Clemson at that time might have, or students who just don't even know what data visualization is, students who have disabilities, students who have some challenges but they're interested in data visualization. So I look at all of that in terms of the students that apply, and I try to develop or assemble a cohort that would be reflective of what I did not see at the VIS conferences, because the whole purpose of that was to get them engaged in data visualization and let them know that these things are options and possibilities for them. So those two cohorts, they did a fantastic job. They've gone on to graduate school. I'm actually, one of them has been accepted into the PhD program at Purdue, and she's going to be in my lab doing data visualization. Others, one has gone on to MIT. We had 2 students, one from each cohort, to actually present at the REU symposium at NSF each year. So this was something, many of these students, not only did they not know about data visualization prior to participating in the program, the things that we covered were new to them. None of them had gone to a conference. I had additional funding to send the entire cohort to a conference each year. So that they really did not appreciate that because they felt like it was just a part of the program, but that was actually something extra for them that was, gave them an opportunity to see what it feels like to go to a conference and to present their work. The other initiative that I started is broadening participation in visualization. So the previous initiative, the REU site, is specifically for undergraduates only. I thought, well, that's for undergraduates. What if there are others who have an interest in data visualization but may not know how to engage or be a part of it? So I wrote another grant. And this was, as the name implies, to broaden participation in visualization of women and members of underrepresented groups. And unlike the REU, this particular initiative is open to all persons with an interest in data visualization. So we had undergraduates, we had graduate students, we had junior faculty, we had postdocs. I mean, it was a virtual array, melting pot of all persons, even from artistic side to administrators who wanted to participate. We even had K through 12 to participate. So unfortunately, the funding would not allow me to cover the cost of the expenses for the elementary school students. They really wanted to participate. I really wanted them to participate. I called and I said to them, I'm sorry, I cannot fund you to come. So what spoke to me as a true indicator of how important they felt that this was, they wrote a grant, got the funding, rented a van, drove from Louisiana to Clemson in South Carolina, and participated in this workshop. So it was 2 days. And so to me, that says this is something that is important, this is something that people value, and it just showed me that they saw the importance and value in it as well. Unfortunately, the first day was hit by the polar vortex, so what was supposed to be a 2-day event for some turned into a week-long event. So yeah, that was an experience. But that also gave me an opportunity to take those remaining funds and host the second BP Viz. However, before I could host the second one at Clemson, I was recruited to Purdue in 2015. And since being at Purdue, I am an assistant professor in the Polytechnic Institute of Computer Graphics and Technology Department, we are developing a new major in data visualization, specifically for undergraduates. So unbeknownst to me, Purdue was watching what I was doing at Clemson. I had no clue about Purdue at all. And they said, we like what you're doing with undergraduates. We want you to come here and take this to the next level. And at that point, I said, so what does that mean? It was all words to me. And so they told me, you'd have an opportunity to build out what you started at Clemson. So those workshops that I developed, the beginning workshops, the intermediate, and the advanced, I'm taking that and I'm building curriculum for the new major in data visualization. And as I mentioned before, the picture of the student in the lower left corner was a participant in the REU site at Clemson in 2015, and so she has since graduated and will be a graduate student, PhD graduate student in my lab at Purdue. So since joining Purdue, I have continued in my efforts to broaden participation in visualization through several different either speaking engagements or opportunities. In 2015, there was a panel here at VIS in which we talked about, could visualization provide a pathway to STEM? And so for me, engaging students in data visualizations opens their horizons or helps them to think about other options that they may not have considered. I have worked with NASA, Open NASA Data Knots, where I give webinars to K through 12 students, particularly girls, trying to engage them in STEM in terms of visualization. I've given Blue Waters seminars where I reach a broader range of people who are interested in data visualization. This summer, I had 3 undergraduate students working with me as part of the summer research opportunity, similar to the REU. And so these students are engaged, they are excited about data visualization, they come to me not knowing anything about data visualization, so I treat that as an opportunity to engage them and let them know of the different things that can be done. At the graduate level, I give a talk to the International High Performance Computing Summer School. For the last 3 years I've done so, and that engages graduate students. And so hopefully you can see that I try to reach every aspect in which there might be people who have some data or have some interest in data visualization, and I try to engage them and make them aware of the different opportunities that are available. So the second BP Viz was held at Clemson, not at Clemson, but at Purdue last year, where it was co-sponsored or co-located. So one day was held at Purdue and the second day was at NCSA. So my keynote speaker of the first BP Viz, which was Donna Cox, was so impressed with the workshop, she said she wanted to be a part of it. And so she has since been a co-organizer of the event. The third BP Viz workshop will be held next year, June 13th through the 14th. We will have a 2-day workshop, one day at Purdue, the second day at NCSA. And again, the need to diversify a field with such far-reaching influences is imperative at all levels. And so I am trying to do my part to engage students and persons of all areas in data visualization. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Aviva Frank, and I don't really belong here. I am a sociology student. Through a wild stroke of luck, I ended up here on the diversity panel. And I'm hoping that I can use my social science knowledge to describe how diversity is really only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to social equity. And I hope that I can provide you all with a framework for understanding how power functions in our society, so that we can better understand why diversity is important and why it's only the first step. So, when you Google diversity, you get a whole lot of very nice but very wishy-washy images of people holding hands and look how nice and happy, and you get no information. It is very superficial and doesn't actually give you any information. That is in part because of a individualistic trend that we have in our society where we think, well, I'm not a bigot. I know 7 whole black people, so therefore I am a good person. And if we include a few people of color in any one field, we're diverse, we're done. That, in my opinion, is incomplete. So let's think structurally. Say the big circle is society. The smaller circle are the circle inside are institutions like education, like the economy, like religion, and then inside of that is groups. Those are data viz people, or lesbians, or people with college education. Basically, it's a subgroup that interacts within institutions. And that itty-bitty little dot, that's you. Yes. So what we do as sociologists is resist thinking individualistically and look at systems and how they impact our life. One of the ways that systems influence us is called socialization, in which we are that tiny baby and we internalize social norms, attitudes, and values. Pretty much from the moment that we're born, we internalize all of these cultural mores and ideas about what is acceptable, what is normal, who belongs in the in-group, who belongs in the out-group. That is important. That teaches us how to be members of a society. However, no society is free of inequality. So in this process, we tend to internalize a lot of these unequal ideas, and because just like society shapes us, we shape society, we perpetuate those unequal norms and behaviors unwittingly, frequently. Sometimes we're explicit about it. The real issue here is that, I'm already down to the next page. The real issue here is that things can feel icky and feel like someone's being mean to you, but that doesn't make it oppression. So we take the prejudices that we learned as a itty-bitty child and got more and more of as we grew up and watched media and interacted with our peers. And so those prejudices could be on race or gender or class or ability. And then we combine it with institutional or systemic power. And that creates oppression on, could be racist oppression or sexist or classist or ableist oppression. Oppression is a big, scary word that none of us really like hearing. It's very scary. Hopefully, I can help guide you into a more structural understanding of what oppression is. Oppression isn't a you thing, it's an all of us thing. We all participate in structural oppression because we all participate in society. So, actually, can I just go back to this for a sec? When we talk about power, which ties into diversity, because those who have less institutional power are underrepresented in positions of power and pretty much anything fun. So the dominant group, which could be white people, it could be able-bodied people, could be heterosexual people, get tacit benefits that are imbued from society. We get opportunities that are just not accessible to other people. And greater access to rights and resources, and those who experience the brunt of oppression have less access and less political power. Institutional oppression is built into our systems. They're built into our economy and our education system and our medical system, our government, all of our religions, and our laws. This is because all of these systems are run by people, and people who have been socialized in our society, which is not equitable, and we have internalized these not equitable ideas and recreate them in individual institutions. One of the most insidious things about institutional oppression is the way that they interact together, reinforce each other, and frequently render each other invisible. If we look back to Peggy McIntosh's seminal White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Backpack, she describes white privilege, but it applies to all privilege, as an invisible weightless backpack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. Just by existing as a person with privilege, we have access to so many more things. Because dominant ideologies are created by dominant groups, we often don't see these privileges and benefits that we are carrying around. Power structures tend to work together to render each other invisible. And no one wants to be an oppressor. I think not one of any of us wants to be an oppressive person. Unfortunately, we are. We all have differing privileges and disprivileges that shape the way that we interact in everyday life. So let's complicate it further. Axes of power, like gender and class and ability and race, all intersect to create your specific life. Not all members of a group are homogenous. My experience of womanhood is different from my mother's experience of womanhood and any other person's experience of womanhood. Some of that is just the general way that we grew up, but a lot of that is because of different axes of identity and oppression. So what does this have to do with diversity? First of all, it's a good way to understand why diversity matters. It's also a first step toward a more equitable society, because by acknowledging and understanding these power structures, we can work to do better. We all need to do better. By making environments more welcoming and available to more people, the essence of diversity, we bring more voices into the conversation, more people who are not unable to see axes of oppression that we may not be able to see, who can point out when things are not equal, and hopefully, ideally, we could work to fix it together. We can try and ameliorate some historical inequity, and maybe in the process distribute some power. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kelly Gaither. I think I was more nervous watching Bernice than I was watching Aviva because I could put myself in her place. But I have to tell you a little bit of a story that goes off of Bob's. So I had a very visceral reaction to the death panel. And when the young lady got up, my first thought was, gosh, she's so much braver than I ever was at that age. You know, just what a celebration. And then when it kind of got to the end of the answers, I kind of had like a visceral, emotional reaction. I don't generally get up, and Bernice beat me to the microphone. So Bernice and I were standing there waiting in line very patiently because we knew that what had been the last statement that I think we're fine, we knew that we're not fine. But there are a number of factors that go into it. The first thing that I did was I went back and sort of tried to understand why and what we can do about it. And if we're really going to change the picture and change the profile, I tried to take a scientific or a systematic way of looking at the problem. So I know Ron is going to talk about definitions of diversity and inclusion again, but I'm going to try to lighten it up a little bit with some images because I communicate through visualizations, right? So this is my favorite visualization of diversity versus inclusion. If you just look at fruit in a bowl, it means something very different than when it is put together to form something that we can all enjoy. They're all working together. So I went back and kind of took a look, and this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. When I was a little kid many moons ago, was really annoyed that Barbie looked nothing like me. So there was this one Barbie called Skipper. She was short, and she was the brunette. She was the brunette. So Barbie was almost exclusively blonde. So in my effort today to kind of look at, if I was going to take a historical look at diversity, what kind of images could I look at society-wide? So I went and took a look at how Barbie has evolved over time and how the different forms of Barbie, and then of course, to be inclusive, the different forms of Ken. So you can see on the right-hand side, Barbie doesn't just have blonde hair, and I was probably most struck, Barbie has hips, so which is great, awesome. And then the guys look very different and very diverse. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit, the first two, sort of the two images up at the top are very US-centric, but this is not a US-centric problem. And I do want to tell you the main point of my part of the panel is to tell you that looking at inclusion and diversity is not a choice. We must do it, and we must all look at it. So it's something that's got to be important to all of us. And I'll give you some pretty shocking numbers that if you don't buy off philosophically on the topic, you should buy off on it in terms of innovation and economics. So in 2020, by 2040, the United States is projected to be a majority-minority country, meaning that no one race or ethnicity will dominate what we consider to be the majority population. And if you look at it, sometimes it's called the browning of the US. So if you look at it in here, the darker blue states are the ones that are projected to be majority minority. So for example, in UT Austin, we are not currently a minority serving institution, but by the 2024 timeframe, we will be, just because of birth and death rates. So the problem really is one of who are we educating? And I'll talk a little bit about why this is a problem. So 71% of all new jobs in the US are in the STEM fields, but we're only graduating 8% in computer science. This is very similar if you look globally, and if you guys don't already know, the one reason we can't easily show what's considered underrepresented or what a minority is because they count very differently country to country. So we can look at gender across nations, but it's very difficult for us to look at underrepresented or even race and ethnicity. But if you look at it, a couple of countries are doing very well, India and Brazil, because they've got very targeted programs for this. But Europe really looks very much like the United States. And the deficit is much more extreme in countries like Africa, or the African countries, where you know that they're emerging countries, they are going to need some sort of computational or digital skill. And the numbers that are going into them aren't at all representative of the population. Here's the problem, is that by 2020, we're projected to have 1.4 million high-tech jobs, so computer science-related jobs. We're only projected to be graduating about 400,000 students that are qualified to fill those jobs. That means in the absence of immigrating people in from other countries to fill those jobs, we're going to have 1 million unmet high-tech jobs in a workforce that's in a nation that's becoming increasingly more computationally demanding. So this is a problem. This is why we have to educate a population that we have to educate students that look much more like our base populations, whatever your base population is. So let's look a little bit at the demographics. So at that point, you kind of go into why? Why is this happening? I can certainly speak from my own personal perspective, but it's much more powerful to look at the numbers and find out what the drivers are. So women's representation in STEM occupations has declined since the 1990s. Men are employed in STEM occupations at 2x the rate of women, but probably more alarming is that nearly 1 in 5 female STEM graduates leave the labor force versus 1 in 10 male STEM graduates. I've got some theories as to why that is. We've talked about it this week, but there are several factors that go into it. In 2011, 6% of STEM workers were Black. That was up from 2% in 1970. Hispanics make up only 7% of the STEM workforce, roughly still 7%. And Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, and other indigenous peoples don't even register on those bar graphs because the numbers are so low. So my argument on the panel is that diversity and inclusion in corporate America, in academic America, in teams, really leads to innovation. So organizational research really proves that diverse, inclusive teams create better products. They're more creative. They create better solutions. You can draw a straight line from there to economic competitiveness. So I looked up a couple of things that I thought might be things you may or may not know, but were pretty shocking. So if you ask 95% of the corporate leaders believe that creating a culture of diversity and inclusion contributes to innovation because of what they've seen in their own corporations, but also because of what research has shown us. So for every 10% increase in racial and ethnic diversity on senior executive teams, you can expect earnings increase of about 0.8%. Companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to have financial returns above national industry medians. 86% female and 74% male millennials consider employers' policies on diversity, equality, and inclusion as a key factor to where they want to go to school and where they want to go to work. I was struck the other day after the mass shooting in Las Vegas that I saw a tweet from a 22-year-old kid, and he was retweeting the statement that said, "This is the largest mass shooting in history." I was more struck by what he said. He said, "This is the 3rd time I've seen something like this, and I'm only 22 years old." So millennials are very much advocates. They very much want to make a change. You can estimate from transitioning from a single gender office to an office that is more evenly split gender-wise, men, women, that translates to about 41% gain in revenue. And a move from no female leaders to 30% representation is associated with roughly a 15% increase in revenue. Additionally, 15% of the world's population has some form of disability. They represent $200 billion in discretionary spending. And disabilities are oftentimes something you don't see when we talk about diversity and inclusion. The combined buying power of the LGBTQ population in the US is $917 billion alone. Veterans perform 4% higher on average and have 3% less turnover if you look at corporate America. This is the one that I want you guys to leave with. Ignoring inclusion and diversity in tech comes with a $16 billion price tag. So we know that the single largest reason that people leave the tech industry, whether it's academic or corporate, is because some sort of unfair treatment in the workplace. And let me say this. So it's going to take all of us. So white guys, you're welcome. You have as big a responsibility as I do. And over the last couple of years, I realized that I needed to take an active role in trying to solve the problem. in any way that I can. But I've had a number of conversations with the guys that I work with, that I've grown up with, until they join me at the table and they make their arguments. I'm going to be 90 years old and still saying the same thing. So let's talk about what we can and should do as a community. So right about the time, right after VIS last year, my husband came home. He was trying to hire, he's seen sort of what happens behind the curtain. He's grown up with me, and oftentimes I've been the only female in the room. He's seen some, ridiculously inappropriate, crazy things over the years. But he came home and he said, I want to tell you something. I want to tell you face to face. And the first thing you do as a spouse is you go, oh God, what? So he came home and he told me, he said, I had a young lady come in for an interview today. And one of my guys, an engineer, actually said out loud, I don't like this. I've been married 4 times and I don't want her around. Women are just a distraction, particularly young women. He said, what do I do about this? I said, well, the good news is he said it out loud. Now you know. Now you know what you have to deal with. I said, the second thing is you got to do something, because everybody that's looking at you is taking their tone and tenor from you. And it kind of spurred me to take even a more active role in what I was doing. That coincided at the time with Teresa Marie reaching out to me to do a VIS Viewpoints article. And I kind of fumbled around a little bit. What should I do? What should I say? And it was really her that said, why don't you talk about inclusion and diversity in VIS? So it came out a week ago, Teresa Marie. So it is an IEEE CGNA VIS Viewpoints. And the title of it is How Visualization Can Foster Diversity and Inclusion in Next Generation Science. And it talks about why we as a community of boundary spanners, meaning we are highly creative and we have an innate ability to work interdisciplinary, we have a responsibility as a community to do some things to solve this problem. So I've also done a couple of other things, kind of follow on to the millennial comment that I had. When I sat down with a group of millennials at a conference a couple of years ago, I realized that this group of kids has very different things on their mind than I did when I was their age. But the one thing that we could all come together on was that everybody wants to make a positive social change. We want to do something to take an opportunity to be an activist, but use our skill set to be able to do that and positively affect that. So this year, we will have our second Advanced Computing for Social Change Challenge. Last year, we tackled sort of the data visualization of Black Lives Matter, constructing arguments, not an emotional discussion about whether you do or don't believe it's real, but really looking at the data and coming at it from different viewpoints, making a data-based argument about it. This year, we're going to look at immigration. We're going to look at the wall. We're going to look at the economic impact of some of the policies that are being proposed and why they may or may not be really detrimental for a society. The other thing is that I have an NSF Includes grant to recruit and train Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders in data science and visualization. So we have won the grant, but this is to incorporate cultural competency, to incorporate cultural norms, because we know in a lot of these communities that family and culture dominate their lives, and sometimes that creates a tension between science and technology, and we as educators really need to be cognizant of this. And in fact, incorporating cultural competency would really improve a lot of what we do when we're communicating and training and teaching. So I just wanted to leave you with that. That's my last slide. Ron is going to talk a lot about what we can do. So now that I've shown you the shock and awe numbers, he's going to give us a lot of information about what we can do. So I'll disconnect. One thing I do want to say is over the week, Jim Ahrens, who's in the back, has given us the opportunity to collect all of the information that's been shown over the week and then distribute it to the community at large. So thank you.
Okay, so yeah, my name is Ron Metoyer. I'm Associate Professor of Computer Science at the University of Notre Dame. I got my undergraduate degree at UCLA, and then went to graduate school at Georgia Tech. And I worked under Jessica Hodgins, and for any of you who may know Jessica, she's a graphics and animation person, and so I worked for many years in the kind of SIGGRAPH community. And then probably around 2010, I kind of moved more towards the Chi and the Viz community. And so since then, I've been attending these two conferences, the Chi conference and the Viz conference. And so when I heard about I was here at Viz last year. I did not go to the death panel, primarily because I wasn't interested in the death of Sci-Viz. But when I heard about the discussion, I was immediately intrigued because I've spent a lot of my career trying to promote diversity for obvious reasons, being an African American in the computer science field. And so I was intrigued by that, and I really wanted to participate in this panel. And so I'm going to spend a little time with some definitions, though hopefully they won't bore you, and then talk about a particular project that I've done with the Chi community that I think we could replicate here and hopefully start making a difference in some ways. So I'm going to start with a kind of a technical definition. So I've worked with ecologists. Ecologists talk about biodiversity, right? And they talk about two things: richness of variety and evenness of abundance. Okay, so how many different kinds of things do I have represented? I'm going to say things, but it's typically species when you're talking to an ecologist. And how evenly distributed are the things over those types that you have, right? But you can replace that with anything, you know, the types. You know, it could be race and ethnicity could be the type. Gender could be it, physical ability, and so on. So essentially, how many different kinds of things do you have, and how evenly are these things distributed over those types or those kinds? And so I actually have some technical background in visualizing diversity. So my first paper here at the Viz Week conference was on visualization of diversity with 3 of my students and Eugene Zhang. And so I have some technical background in visualizing diversity, but of course we're not interested in talking about visualizing diversity here today. We're interested in diversifying visualization, Viz, the conference and the community. And so that's what I want to spend some time on. So I wanted to first expand our definition a little. So I pulled this from the National Science Foundation. I know it's a lot of words. I tried to bold some things here. But, you know, being a scientific community, I figured, you know, we could turn to the NSF definition. And I know this is an international community, and the NSF is not necessarily an international organization. But I still think it's a good definition to look at in terms of understanding where I come from when I think about diversity. And so here we see that the NSF defines diversity in terms of these individual attributes, right? And these can be various kinds of attributes. We know ethnicity and language and sexual orientation, right? And we can go on and on. There's lots of things that make people different. And it's really about differences when we look at NSF. And they even go as far as talking about where people are from, where they've lived, you know, things like socioeconomic conditions and so on, right? So those things that make us different, that give us differences in thought and give us differences in life experiences, right? And as Kelly was saying, and Aviva as well, those are the things that bring value to the community, okay? These differences of thoughts and opinions and life experiences, because that's where we get kind of innovation in how we think about problems and solving problems. Another term we've heard a lot here is underrepresentation, and just to be clear, again, when NSF talks about it, they talk a lot about underrepresentation in the STEM fields, which is essentially what happens when certain groups of people are not represented in that particular group the same way that they're represented in the general population, right? And that's an important thing to consider. And the particular underrepresented groups that NSF focuses on when it comes to STEM, and even more specifically computer science, are the ones in bold here. So we've got women in computing, we've got the underrepresented minorities, which includes African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, Native Pacific Islanders, right? So we've got a big group there. But as well, the economically disadvantaged and people with disabilities. Okay, so these are all part of what NSF generally considers underrepresented groups, and which I try to focus on in the work that I do in this area. And then, as Kelly mentioned, the other term we hear a lot is inclusion, right? And this definition here, this I believe, I should have put a citation here, I believe this is also from NSF, but it's really more about a culture, right? a culture that encourages collaboration and flexibility and fairness, where you leverage diversity, right? Where diversity is an important thing in that culture. And when I say culture, I don't mean a national culture, but I mean small group culture, whether it's a work culture or a culture in a community like the VIS community here. Okay? So these are all things that are important to me when I think about diversifying FIS, right? Looking at diversity, looking at inclusion, and looking at underrepresentation. Because in a lot of conversations that I've been involved in over the years, diversity doesn't necessarily always mean fixing underrepresentation and addressing underrepresentation issues. And to me, that's a very important part of it. So what is our goal? One of the questions I think we have to ask ourselves is what is our goal here in the VIS community? Is it just about richness of variety and evenness of abundance, creating diversity, or is it looking about underrepresentation in particular and trying to figure out how to create a community in VIS that's more representative of our broader community, whether that's in the US or internationally, right? Is inclusiveness an important part of this? And I think obviously all of these things are important. I think you essentially don't have to have inclusiveness to create diversity and start broadening participation, but you can't maintain it if you don't have inclusiveness, right? It's a critical part. And so my general position when it comes to broadening participation in the VIS community is that we really need to actively engage in this topic. And when I say we, I mean everybody has to be a part of it. And when I say actively engage, I mean it's not just a matter of building it and they will come, right? It's a matter of being very proactive and going out and identifying the groups that you want to be a part of this community, inviting them into the community, mentoring them, promoting them within the community, and trying to build this community that's more reflective of the population that you're after. And that's at all levels, not just participating in the conference, but doing things like presenting posters and mentoring people to learn how to write papers and being part of the power structure as Aviva was referring to. These are all important parts of creating a culture of inclusion, and so you have to be active about it. And so as an example, one of the things that we did in the CHI community, and when I say we, it was myself and Manuel Perez-Quinones, is that we organized a mentoring workshop in 2010. We called it CHI Mentoring Workshop. And it was essentially designed to get a bunch of graduate students. So this is all focusing on graduate students, so underrepresented graduate students, with the intention of helping them build relationships and networks with their peers, so a cohort within the CHI community, building relationships and networks with the leaders in their field, which we know is incredibly important to start promoting people, to provide a welcoming environment for them to get that mentoring and also to start some collaborations in terms of research, and to encourage their participation in STEM. In the venue, so in CHI in particular. You'd be surprised, for example, there are students out there who are being, who are in HCI programs, but are not being encouraged to do things like attend CHI. You have to be there, right? If you're a graduate student doing research in human-computer interaction, that's something you need to be doing. So we organized this workshop. It was co-located with CHI in 2010, and I'm drawing a blank. I believe that was in Atlanta, but I'm not positive. It was a 2-day workshop. We had a bunch of wonderful speakers, so it was all about exposing these students to each other and to leaders in their field. And you might recognize some of these names. Jim Foley is a well-known person in HCI and computer graphics. Jeffrey here, who is obviously well-known here at the VIS conference. All these folks came and spoke to these students. So they just gave their time during the conference to come and give presentations and spend some time with them. We had a total of 40 participants from 21 institutions. 31 women out of those 40, and it wasn't as diverse as we would have liked over the underrepresented groups. So 24 African American students and 6 Hispanic students. And this was funded primarily by the Computing Research Association, the CDC, which is the Coalition to Diversify Computing, not the Center for Disease Control, and the National Science Foundation. I see someone nodding. Well, yeah, it could be a problem, right, that we need to fix. And the National Science Foundation. And so it was a big success. We got a lot of great feedback from both the students and the speakers and so on. And so we did it again in 2012. This one was a 1.5-day workshop. Again, a bunch of great speakers from the field. We had 30 participants from 22 institutions, and because word had gotten out, we got a much bigger pool of applicants. We had a much better distribution over the underrepresented groups, including 5 students with disabilities. And again, it was a wonderful success. That one was funded by the CRA and some industry sponsors, Microsoft, Intel, and IBM. I've put Microsoft in there twice. They did not sponsor us twice, sorry. And so this is one of those examples, right? So this was just a very active effort to go out, find these students, bring them to the conference, and we funded them. So they were completely funded to attend this workshop and then to attend the CHI conference. It was completely paid for, right? So we knew that if they came to this workshop, they'd also be going to CHI and getting the full benefit. And so, was it a success overall? It's hard to measure success. We didn't do a good job of tracking, but I've gone back and I've looked for all those students and tried to figure out what they're doing now. And of the 70 students, I was able to find 58 of them. And 11 are still in PhD programs. 19 of them are industry researchers and entrepreneurs, and they did complete their PhD. We've got 7 postdocs. We have 21 of those students in faculty positions. Right? So to me, this is really, really phenomenal. Now, I'm not saying this is all a result of our workshop, but I do think we played a big role in promoting them and getting them out there and getting them engaged with the community. And last year, actually, this year at CHI, one of the students got a Best Paper Award, so we were really proud of that. Since then, CHI has done some other things. They have now a diversity and inclusion luncheon that they do every year. It's gone the last 2 years. That's not so much about mentoring, but it's just about talking about diversity and inclusion and starting to create that culture. That's important. So the last question I have is, are we ready as a community to do something similar, right? A VIS mentoring workshop. I think it would be fairly easy to pull off. Obviously, you need to get funding, but I think there's funding for something like this out there. And so, are we ready to actively invite, mentor, and promote students from these underrepresented communities? And I think we can do that. And if we do, I think we can get to, our diverse team where we each bring our unique talents and our superpowers to solve the VIS problems out there. So with that, I'd like to end. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk about diversity from quite a different angle. Some of you may be there last year in the depth of scientific visualization panel. So this is actually a follow-on from that as well, like the other two. So I would actually like to, before introducing myself and the topic, I would like to sort of recap what we have seen in last year's conference in that panel. This is the trend of between 2008 and 2016, the number of papers submitted for IEEE VIS conferences, including InfoVis, VAS, and SciVis. Now, some of you know some know the histories of this conference. For example, the SciVis actually starting from 2013, well, named from VIS to SciVis. So as generally, this is what happened. So this is what gets people asking the questions, right? All right, this is the number I pulled from the internet. So this is what started. Now for me, when I look at this picture, when I'm a technologist and ask myself the questions, what is the reason, potential reason for this potential sort of comparison-wise, the drop of SciVis paper submission? So what is the background for that? Because technology, first of all, go back to this topic. I hope at the end it's clear what's the link between these two. Technology diversity, to me, technology is actually the methods, the techniques, the tools, all these things created by people. So technology diversity is, in a way, is a reflection of how diverse the people's knowledge, understanding, expertise in the field. So in order to have a very diverse community, one of the fundamental driver, a reflection on the reality, is that perhaps quite a way to understand that human diversity is understand what's actually been on offer in the community, right? So this is where my angle is. I'm coming from Science and Technology Facilities Council, one of the 7 research councils in the UK. So I look after a group, it's more a practitioner group. Actually, a practitioner group look after 2 types of things. We work closely with large facilities, national facilities such as synchrotron, neutron, high power laser, space science and all that, so very large instrument. So STFC, Science and Technology Facility Council, the facilities is the key word, large instruments and science. So on the other hand, we also increasingly starting to work with civil engineers, look after perhaps more posh words, smart city, urban science kind of data. So when I look at this two type of research, if you look at the technology available for this 2 type of community, it's actually quite a distinct characteristic. In terms of number, when you look at SciVis community, the number of tools available, popular tools, it's small compared to the number of tools you can choose and pick and develop in this InfoVis or VAST community. It's just such an unbalance. So for one hand, if I want to develop something in the SciVis and on that side for microtomography imaging to 3D, 2D to all the way to 4D, the choices are actually very limited. There's a small handful of them. But on the other hand, I really pleased is that the worries we have is actually which tools, techniques we choose, rather than we worry about the choices. Do you see what I mean? Okay, so actually, because I'm a practitioner, the reason I'm coming here, I'm not trying to representing I do not know the history of this conference starting from 1990s, right? I do not claim I know all the history and why and what. So this is my 2nd time in this conference, so this really just representing my view on how I see this community. Hopefully, give you a perspective from a different angle. On the other hand, visualization is really very important to bear in mind. It's from a practitioner point of view, it's really a system. Although it's a whole world of visualization techniques, tools, and methodologies out there, but it's at the end of the day, in the real world, it's really a system of part of a very big ecosystem. So it's never ever stand alone. So you have to bear that in mind when you develop things. So going back to this picture, this picture is the numbers. Numbers from all these years. One of the things it tells us is that, get me asked the question is, why is like that? As I mentioned earlier, now, you might debate, you might argue, I'm working in a very niche and small field. This small field, microtomography, in large synchrotron these days, is actually a very demanding, challenging, highly data-intensive science, because one of the things they are pushing very hard is, in terms of imaging, microtomography imaging, they are talking about 4K by 4K volumes, and each of the volume is a time resolved. So it's a 4D image, 4K by 4K. Imagine how big the data size is. This is not just data size, it's actually a whole spectrum of issues. Once the data volume increases to such a scale, whole spectrum of issues associated with it in terms of analysis and visualization. So, but on the other hand, if you look at this on this right-hand side, this sort of more InfoVis area, as I mentioned earlier, the choices is just spectacular long list of things you can choose from. Really, what here is you need to make the right choices. There, it's not such the case, because a lot of the tools they're developed, it has been around for 15 plus years, has been very well established. What actually it says is that, actually, if you want to do something in that area, you better go, either you go with them, or you are rich enough to buy something commercial, which are very, very expensive. So, but for the newcomers, it's actually very hard to come into that community. So if you want to drilling this a little bit deeper in terms of understanding, if you want to develop a technique or new tools for these 2 community, microtomography imaging, 4D imaging, or you want to do something InfoVis and all that, the amount, I have quite a lot of details here. You can read into that. But one of the things I want to highlight, what I've just mentioned, is the volume of data. This is clearly here I talk about experimental facility, but for simulation it's exactly the same. It's a huge amount of data size here we're talking about. That in order to really become someone working in this field, developing tools, developing techniques, what that means is that you really need to have quite a large infrastructure to HPC clusters, thousands of cores, and huge storage space, and all that with you, in order to really start to look at it, just looking at the problem. But on the other hand, if you are on a standalone sort of person, individual researchers without much resources, without a large team, it's actually very hard to work on this the field on that kind of large science field. But on the other hand, InfoVis is much relatively easy. I emphasize relative, because a lot of the things so far has been quite manageable for individual small research teams. Things you can do on the laptop, things you can do D-free, just for the sake of argument, D-free. You can do it within 1 hour using your laptop. You can get data, open data. There are lots of open data out there. There's a lot of tools out there. There are lots of things. You can get it going very quickly with a small team with a very little investment. But things are actually also changing even in the InfoVis domain, because increasingly you might have heard about this term of multi-scale multi-scale data analysis. This is talking about analyzing this data, geospatial data across different scale, from the street level, from the household level, all the way to the national, international level. This, again, hitting the big data problem. What does that mean? It means that it demands a huge backing in terms of making research progress, advances in that area. So what is that? This is just sort of things I pulled out from the community I'm particularly familiar with. This is a synchrotron and photron facilities around the world. There are many. The key thing here is the most expensive equipments, big science equipments in the world, without surprise, is where they are, is in America. So this is why the tools, all the tools you see in those big science for microtomography, all started in America and all developed, still today is American dominating that research and development field. But this is today. This is today. Things will be changing. So actually, what I'm trying to say is that if you think about 10 years on from now, from today, if the things, we know the developing world without the emerging market, emerging countries such as China, the BRIC countries and all that, those countries starting to invest very heavily in this fundamental science and technology. What that means is that the visualization, the analysis technology will starting to, those communities will starting to grow very rapidly. So what does that actually, what we can do in terms of promoting or fostering technology diversity in visualization? I think if we do nothing, that means that our personal view, this is again, of course, it's my personal view, is that you wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of the tools in the SciVis, InfoVis will be reinventing if we do nothing. But if we starting to open the door, do more about it, welcome newcomer to come into this field, there are tons of things we can do in terms of communication, in terms of managing the perception, in terms of inspiring people, in terms of rewarding people to promote technological diversity, which again, I believe is a very essential point of promoting diversity in general in the community. Thank you for your attention.